Faith-based organisations have been amongst the most sustainable and the most empowering organisations I've come across. I remember a religious leader in Nsaru in Malawi who, together with the community leaders, set up 21 voluntary under-5 schools, and completely sustainable, no outside inputs at all. And yet some faith-based organisations have also been amongst the most discriminatory, and they've created dependence. You know, I've seen religious leaders who've incited violence even against children. So religion has the power to transform, but also to deform development. Faith, to me, is a bit like a fuel, and like any fuel, it's flammable. We need to handle it, but we need to handle it with care. So traditionally, aid agencies kept a healthy, safe distance, a healthy separation between religion and development. They were skeptical and they were wary. They wanted clear blue water between the two. They feared that engaging with religion would mean that religious groups would try and convert people towards their own faith. They feared that working with religions would mean that they promoted discrimination against women, against people of different sexual orientation, against any sort of minority group. And they also feared that engaging with religion might lead to supporting a particular partisan political agenda, and even in some cases promoting violent conflict. So we all have our horror stories about religion and development. The question is, though, whether we manage to go beyond some of the personal experiences we've got and generalizing from those to actually engaging with religion on a case-by-case basis, a much more nuanced approach to what that might look like. The challenge is this policy of estrangement meant that the secular development enterprise relied on brute logic to bring about change. But in fact, people's motivations come from their underlying beliefs that shape their attitudes and drive their behavior. And so religion has become more and more important to aid agencies. They've tried to explore what moving from estrangement to engagement might look like. And as they've thought about this over the last decade, they found actually religions have the potential to add value in the usual DAC assessment criteria of relevance, of effectiveness, of efficiency, of sustainability, and of impact. So in terms of relevance, it said that something like 80% of the world's populations profess a religious faith. This means that religion is part of their worldview, it's part of their understanding of what well-being looks like. It's part of their understanding of development. The World Bank study on Voices for the Poor found that religious leaders and religious institutions were amongst the most trusted in society. And religious leaders have the influence to shape social norms, so they're highly relevant. They're also effective. Religious groups have been part of providing health and education services for centuries. In sub-Saharan Africa at the moment, they provide up to 40% of the healthcare services. And religions also can be quite efficient in development. Because they elicit a motivated voluntary service from members, they can often do things at a fraction of the cost than the public sector and certainly from the private sector. And in terms of sustainability, religions have been there for often centuries. They have a long-term sustainable presence in some of the most remote areas, and particularly in fragile states. They have the reach into areas that government isn't able to get to. And finally, in terms of impact, well, if you just look at advocacy or lobbying alone, it was religious groups that were at the centre of the abolition of slavery movement in the UK, in the civil rights movement in the US, Jubilee 2000, Again, in the UK with the debt campaign, religious leaders were at the centre of the resistance to dictatorships in Latin America in the 1980s, in Asia, in the Philippines, Thailand, Indonesia, and in Africa too. So if you're looking at relevance, efficiency, effectiveness, sustainability and impact, religions have quite a lot potentially to offer. DFID has been part of a shift amongst many agency governments from the UK, from America, from Germany, from Switzerland, from Sweden, from Netherlands. They've all tried to explore how they can engage better with religion in development. DFID has come a long way maybe since the statement by Alistair Campbell under Tony Blair's government, who said, "We don't do God." Just a couple of years ago, Baroness Varsi organised a meeting of 8 government ministries under the title, "Governments Do God." In 2012, DFID launched a paper entitled Faith Partnership Principles, which laid out why it was important for DFID to engage with religions in development and how. So the policy has shifted dramatically. The practice, however, lags a bit further behind. In practice, there's still a reticence, there's still an ambivalence to engaging with faith. So how do we move ahead on this? How do we close that gap between policy and practice? Well, I'd suggest a number of things that we can do. First is just to recognise that it will be messy. There's no neat, clear divide between the sacred and the secular. It's described as a theoretical exercise. But it's also a subjective exercise. So, for example, if a nun is praying with a dying AIDS patient, is that very appropriate compassion, or is it an abuse of a vulnerable person? So it all depends on the perspective of the person. So accept that it will be messy, it will be risky. We have to be very clear about what is the bottom line. What are the non-negotiables that the boundaries that we can't go over? These might be that we won't engage with religions where there's sectarian politics involved, or where there's a promotion of violent conflict or something like that. But also we need to remember that the more boundaries we put in place, the less room there is for active collaboration. Thirdly, we need to develop understanding. We need to understand how and why religions work as they do, and also recognise the diversity within religious groups. Some people would call this faith literacy. But we need to go beyond just a head knowledge, a head understanding. We need to withhold our own judgments. We all have our own experiences of religions, and we all have our own particular faith or lack of faith. And we need to withhold this in order to genuinely listen and to genuinely understand. We need to recognise that religions are diverse, they're far from heterogeneous, that the term faith-based organisation may conceal as much as it reveals. And so we need to engage with them on a case-by-case basis. We need to recognise that it's vital to have open and constructive dialogue. There will be things where religion and development have definite disagreements. It might be about LGBT rights, it might be about the role of women, it might be about contraception, it might be about abortion, it might be about capital punishment. There are areas where it might be difficult to find common ground. But there needs to be an active and open discussion of what this is, in order to find out what areas there are where collaboration is possible. Because it's only by collaboration in practice, by not just sweeping something under the carpet or putting it up as an insurmountable obstacle, that you can actually get to a constructive engagement between religion and development that is genuinely transformative in people's lives.